Chapter 1. Munich. His name was Ahmed Bouchiki. He was 29 years old. He worked the afternoon shift at a small café in Lillehammer, Norway. He was saving money. His wife was 7 months pregnant. That evening, he went to see a movie with her. Something light, something ordinary. On the way home, he was shot twice in front of her on a public street. He was not a terrorist. He was not a militant. He had never been to Munich. He had nothing to do with any of it. He just looked like someone else. This is the story of how that happens. How a machine built by people with genuine grief and genuine purpose can move so far and so fast that by the time it makes a mistake, there is no one left to stop it. We start 2 years earlier. We start with 11 bodies and a decision that could not be undone. September 5th, 1972. It is 4:30 in the morning in Munich, West Germany. The Olympic Games are 3 days from closing. 8 men climb a fence. They are wearing track suits. They are carrying duffel bags. They know exactly where they are going because some of them have been working inside the village for weeks, learning it, memorizing it, waiting. By 6 in the morning, they have 11 Israeli athletes and coaches. By midnight, the following day, all 11 are dead. The rescue attempt at the airport is a disaster. German snipers who are not trained for this, a gunfight in the dark, helicopters on a runway, and when it is over, 11 Israelis dead, 5 attackers dead, 3 attackers captured. Those 3 will be released 2 months later in exchange for a hijacked plane. Released, walked out of a German prison, and handed back. Now I want you to imagine a specific moment, not a speech, not a press conference, a room. Late at night, sometime in the weeks after Munich, Golda Meir is sitting with her intelligence chief and a small number of people she trusts. She is 64 years old. She has spent her entire life building something that the world has tried repeatedly to destroy. And 11 of her people are dead, and the men who planned it are free, and the German government is already quietly apologizing and moving on. Someone in that room puts a list on the table. The list has names on it. The men believed to have planned Munich. The men believed to have organized it, funded it, enabled it. Not soldiers killed in battle, men living in apartments in Europe and the Middle East, men having dinner, men sleeping. The question on the table is whether to kill them, not arrest, not extradite, not prosecute, kill them, wherever they are, under whatever flag they are hiding behind. Kill them until the people who thought Munich was a viable strategy understand that there is no place that is far enough away. Golda Meir said yes. And here is the thing I need you to sit with. She did not say yes in a moment of rage. She did not say yes because she stopped thinking. She said yes slowly, deliberately, after consideration, because she believed it was right. Because she believed that when courts cannot reach and governments will not act, and 3 men who helped murder 11 people just walked out of a German prison, something else has to take their place. She believed she was doing what had to be done. The operation was given a name: Wrath of God. The primary target was a man named Ali Hassan Salameh, head of operations for Black September. Intelligent, careful, connected to people in places that made him difficult to touch. He was the architect. He was the name at the top of the list. The Mossad spent months looking for him, following threads, building intelligence, running sources across multiple countries. And in the summer of 1973, one of those threads led to a small city in Norway called Lillehammer. Population around 20,000, quiet, surrounded by mountains. The kind of place that exists at the edge of the world in the best possible way, where nothing important has ever happened and nothing important is expected to happen. Someone had been seen there, someone who matched the description, someone who moved in a way that felt familiar to people trained to notice such things. The intelligence traveled up the chain. People looked at it. People asked questions. People signed off. The answer that came back was yes. We have him. He is in Lillehammer. Now, I want to tell you about the problem with that answer. When you build a machine like Wrath of God, you build it with purpose and urgency, and the absolute conviction that what you are doing is necessary. You staff it with people who are skilled and motivated and who believe in the mission, and then you point it at a target and you let it run. And the machine does what machines do. It moves forward. It builds momentum, because that is what it was built to do. But here is what no one talks about when they talk about intelligence operations. The pressure inside the machine does not push toward doubt, it pushes toward confirmation. When an agent in the field identifies a target, that identification moves through a chain of people who have all invested months into this moment, who all need this to be correct. Not because they are corrupt, not because they are reckless, because they are human beings inside an institution that is moving in one direction. The man in Lillehammer was not Ali Hassan Salameh. He was Ahmed Bouchiki, 29 years old, Moroccan. He had come to Norway several years earlier looking for a different life. He had found one. He worked at a café. He had friends. He had learned enough Norwegian to joke with the regulars. He had married a Norwegian woman named Toril, and they were expecting their first child in 2 months, and he used to put his hand on her stomach in the evenings and wait to feel the baby move. He looked something like the man on the list. He was olive-skinned, dark-haired, the right general shape. Someone who did not know Ali Hassan Salameh well enough, who was looking hard enough, who needed to find him badly enough, looked at Ahmed Bouchiki and saw what they were looking for. That was enough. On the evening of July 21st, 1973, Ahmed and Toril went to see a movie. This is the detail that stays with me every time I come back to this story. They went to see a movie. A normal evening. A pregnant woman and her husband doing what people do when they are building a life together and the world feels basically safe. On the way home, on a public street in Lillehammer, Norway, 2 men approached Ahmed Bouchiki and shot him 14 times. Toril was standing next to him. She watched it happen. She was 7 months pregnant, and she watched her husband die on the street, and there was nothing she could do. And the men who did it walked away, because that was the plan. Clean and efficient and already in motion before anyone understood that something had gone catastrophically wrong. Here is where the story changes. Here is where it stops being the story everyone expects, because 2 of the agents did not get away. Norwegian police, responding faster than anyone anticipated, arrested 2 Mossad operatives within hours and then more. Eventually, 11 people connected to the operation were identified. Several were arrested, tried, and convicted in a Norwegian court. For the first time in its history, the Mossad was sitting in a courtroom in a foreign country, answering for what it had done. Not for killing a terrorist, for killing a waiter. Goldemir had said yes to something she believed was necessary and right. The people who built Wrath of God believed they were serving justice. The agents in the field believed their intelligence was solid. Every person in the chain was acting on genuine conviction. and Ahmed Bouchiki bled out on a street in Norway while his pregnant wife screamed for help. This is not a story about evil. Evil would be simpler. This is a story about what happens when a system built on certainty encounters the one thing it was never designed to handle: being wrong. Next chapter, we go inside the operation. We follow the team into Lillehammer. We follow Ahmed through his last ordinary day. And we watch two timelines move toward each other until they collide on a summer street, and nothing is the same after. Chapter 2. Lillehammer. Toril would say later that he was humming, just quietly, to himself, the way people hum when they do not know they are doing it. They were walking home from the cinema. It was a Saturday evening in July. The sun was still up because in Norway in July, the sun does not fully set. It just gets low and golden and stays there, this long amber light that makes everything look suspended, like the world is holding its breath. Ahmed was humming and Toril's back hurt, and they were in the middle of a conversation about something that needed fixing in the apartment. That is the last ordinary moment. Right there. A man humming on a summer street, his pregnant wife beside him, talking about something domestic and small and completely real. 2 months later, their son would be born. Ahmed would never hold him. Let us go back to the morning. Ahmed Bouchiki woke up before Toril. He almost always did. She was 7 months pregnant, and sleeping had become something she had to work at, finding the right position, the right pillow arrangement, and when she finally got there, he would not disturb her for anything. He got up carefully. He made coffee. He stood at the window and looked at the mountains. This is the detail I keep coming back to. The mountains. Ahmed was from Morocco. He had grown up with heat and dust in a completely different relationship with the physical world. And then he'd come to Norway and ended up in Lillehammer of all places, this small city ringed by mountains so large they feel personal, like they are looking at you specifically. He had been here long enough to have built a life, and he had never stopped finding the mountains strange and worth looking at. That is not a small thing. That is someone who is still paying attention, still present, still finding the world surprising enough to stand at a window with coffee and just look at it. He was 29 years old. He had come to Norway a few years earlier looking for something better and had found it in a form he probably had not expected. A city that was cold and small and far from everything familiar. Work at a café where he learned the regulars by name and they learned his. A woman named Toril who was Norwegian and funny and who looked at him in a way that made him want to stay. He stayed. He married her. He learned enough of the language to make people laugh in it. He built the kind of life that does not make headlines because it does not need to. Quiet, honest, real. And now there was a child coming, and the child needed a name. And they'd been arguing about it for weeks in the way that people argue when they are actually happy, where the argument is just another form of being close to someone. He worked the afternoon shift that day. The cafe was not far from their apartment. He knew the walk the way you know a walk you have done hundreds of times, not as directions, but as a sequence of small, familiar things. A corner, a doorway, a particular sound the street makes at a certain hour. He came home tired, but not the bad kind of tired. Toril had made dinner. They ate together and talked, and at some point Ahmed said there was something on at the cinema. Something light. Did she want to go? She almost said no. her back, the tiredness that comes from carrying a life inside your body. But Ahmed wanted to go and she wanted to be near him, so she said yes. They walked to the cinema in the summer light. They watched the film. Neither of them would remember later what it was about. It does not matter what it was about. What neither of them knew, what Ahmed could not have known, was that he had been watched for days, not because of anything he had done, not because of anything he was, because of the way he looked, because of the shape of his face, and the way he moved, and the fact that someone who was looking very hard for a very specific person looked at Ahmed Bouchiki on a street in Lillehammer and believed they had found him. They had not found him, but the machine was already moving. After the film, they walked home. Lillehammer on a Saturday evening in July. Families out, couples walking, that long gold light still hanging over everything. The kind of evening that feels designed to make you believe that nothing bad has ever happened anywhere. Ahmed was humming. Turil's back hurt. They were talking about the apartment. The street they turned onto was called Furubakken, a few minutes from home, the kind of walk your feet know without being told. Two men came toward them. Turil noticed them the way you notice strangers on a quiet street. A brief unconscious glance, nothing alarming, just two men walking in their direction in the evening light. And then everything changed in the space of a breath. The men did not slow down. They did not hesitate. They moved toward Ahmed with a directness that Turil's mind could not immediately process, because nothing in her life had prepared her to process it. And then there were sounds she would spend years trying to describe and could never find the right words for. And the man she loved was on the ground, and the men were gone. And the street was quiet again, and the summer light kept doing what it does in Norway in July, just hanging there, golden and indifferent, while Turil stood on the pavement and screamed for help that could not come fast enough to matter. Baniti, Ahmed Bouchiki was shot 14 times. I want you to stay with that number for a moment, not because it is graphic, because of what it means. 14 times means certainty. 14 times means a machine making absolutely sure. 14 times means that somewhere in the logic of this operation, the question of whether this was the right man had already been answered and filed away. And the answer was yes. The answer was wrong. He died on that street, not at a hospital after doctors tried everything. On the pavement on Furubakken on a Saturday evening in July, while the light refused to become dark and his wife stood over him and their unborn son had no idea that the world had just changed completely. Turil survived. The child survived. She gave birth to a boy 2 months later. She named him. She brought him home to an apartment where Ahmed's coffee cup was still in the cupboard and his coat was still on the hook by the door, and none of it made any sense yet. She raised him alone. Here is what the investigation found. The identification of Ahmed Bouchiki as Ali Hassan Salama was not one mistake made by one person in one moment. It was a sequence of small decisions that each seemed reasonable in isolation and became catastrophic in combination. An observation, an assumption, a confirmation that was sought and therefore found. A chain of people who all needed the answer to be yes, and so the answer was yes. No one lied. No one was reckless in a way they would have recognized as reckless. They were human beings inside a machine that was built to move forward, and they moved forward. And at the end of that forward movement was Ahmed Bouchiki walking home from a movie. The real Ali Hassan Salama was in Beirut. He had been in Beirut the entire time. He would remain alive for 6 more years, never knowing that a man who looked something like him had died in his place on a Norwegian street. He was eventually killed in 1979 in a car bombing in an operation that actually had the right man. He never knew about Lillehammer. Ahmed never knew why. Norwegian police responded faster than anyone in the operation expected. Lillehammer was not built for invisibility. It was 20,000 people who noticed strangers. A shooting on a public street was not something that dissolved into urban noise. People had seen things, people remembered things, and Norwegian police, thorough and methodical, and operating on their own soil under their own laws, followed what they had seen and remembered. 2 members of the operation were arrested that same night. More followed over the next days. Eventually, 6 people connected to the operation would stand trial in a Norwegian court. This had never happened before. Not like this, not in public, not with evidence and lawyers and a judge and the full procedural weight of a democratic legal system applied to something that was supposed to exist only in shadow. The agents were convicted. They served partial sentences. They were quietly released after a relatively short time. Israel never officially acknowledged the operation. There was no formal apology. There was no public recognition of what had been done. There was the silence that institutions produce when they have done something they cannot explain without explaining everything. Tyrell gave interviews over the years, many of them. She was not angry in the way people expected her to be angry. She did not call for executions or political consequences or any of the dramatic forms of justice that the situation seemed to demand. What she asked for was smaller than that and harder than that. She wanted someone to say his name, someone with the authority to say it officially, formally, on behalf of the institution that had made the decision. She wanted someone to stand up and say, Ahmed Bouchiki existed. He mattered. What happened to him was wrong, and it was our fault. Decades passed. She is still waiting. Next chapter, we go into the courtroom. For the first time in its history, the Mossad's work is examined under public light. Agents on a witness stand, evidence entered into a record. A judge deciding what words like responsibility and accountability mean when the people being held accountable were acting on orders from a government that will not admit the orders existed. And the question that the entire story has been building toward. When the machine is wrong, who answers for it? The agents who pulled the trigger, the analysts who confirmed the identification, the people who signed off on the operation, the prime minister who said yes? Or does the machine answer for itself? And if the machine cannot be put on trial, what does justice actually mean? Chapter 3. The Courtroom. Sylvia Raphael was sitting in a Norwegian courtroom when Israel announced it had never heard of her. Not in those words. The official statement was more careful than that. Israel had no knowledge of any operation in Lillehammer. Israel had no agents in Norway. Whatever had occurred was a matter involving private individuals whose alleged connections to Israeli intelligence were speculative and unsubstantiated. She was 32 years old. She had spent the last decade of her life working for the institution that had just announced she did not exist. She did not react visibly. People in that room who watched her said she did not move. Let us establish what made this trial impossible. The Mossad does not appear in courtrooms. That is not arrogance. That is the foundational logic of covert intelligence work. You operate in shadow precisely because shadow is where you are effective. The moment you step into light, into a public proceeding with records and transcripts and journalists taking notes, you have already lost something that cannot be recovered. Israel understood this, which is why the official position from the moment the arrests happened was absolute. No operation, no authorization, no knowledge. This position was maintained publicly and completely regardless of what everyone in that courtroom privately knew to be true. The prosecutor spoke Ahmed Bouchiki's name on the first day, just the name, into the silence of a room where everyone understood its weight, into a space where saying a name out loud means acknowledging that the person it belonged to was real and is gone. And someone sitting in this room is responsible for that. Abraham Gamer, Sylvia Raphael, Zwi Steinberg, Marianne Gladnikoff, the people who heard it, the people who did not look away. Here is what the prosecution established in the flat language that courts require for facts this large. Ahmed Bouchiki was a Moroccan citizen living legally in Norway. He had no criminal record. He had no connection to any militant organization. He had no connection to the Munich attack. He had no connection to Black September. He was a waiter. He was a husband. He was about to become a father. He was killed on a public street in a NATO member country by agents of a foreign government, operating without the knowledge or consent of Norwegian authorities. In a country that had done nothing to invite this, in a country that had offered Ahmed Bouchiki a place to build his life and had failed to protect him because it had no idea there was anything to protect him from. The prosecution did not need to argue that what happened was wrong. That was not in dispute. What was in dispute was whether wrong had a name, whether it could be assigned to people sitting in a room rather than to the abstract logic that had put them there. The defense argument was about Munich. 11 people murdered at the Olympics. Their killers freed within months by a German government that capitulated to a hijacking, an organization that had made clear it would continue. A government that believed it had an obligation to act when the normal mechanisms of international law had completely failed. The defense attorney stood in front of those 12 Norwegian jurors and asked them to understand that Sylvia Raphael was not a criminal in any ordinary sense, that she was an instrument of a policy rooted in legitimate grief, that she had been given a target and told the target was real and had acted on that information in good faith. Sylvia Raphael sat behind him and listened to herself described in the third person, as an instrument, as a person who had acted in good faith. She had been trained for this, not for Norway specifically, not for a proceeding this thorough and patient and unimpressed by the logic of national security exceptions, but for the moment when you are reduced to what you did and asked to justify it. She had believed she was ready for that moment. April 28, 2026, 1723. Maximum. She had not anticipated sitting in a courtroom while the country that trained her announced she was a private individual. There is a specific quality to betrayal that arrives without warning inside a larger crisis. The larger crisis for Sylvia Raphael was the trial itself, the charges, the possibility of years in a Norwegian prison, the fact of Ahmed Bouchiki's name spoken out loud in a room where she had to listen to it. These were the things she had prepared herself for, in the way that you prepare for things you cannot prevent. The Israeli statement arrived inside that larger crisis like something she had not made room for. She could not dispute it publicly. She could not confirm what it denied. Her training and her loyalty and the operational logic she had internalized over a decade all pointed the same direction. You do not acknowledge. You do not confirm. You protect the institution even when the institution is protecting itself by sacrificing you. That is the logic. She believed in the logic. She had built her life around the logic. And so she sat in that courtroom and did not move while Israel announced she was nobody. And the question of what she felt in that moment, whether it was rage or grief or something that had no name, that question belongs to her. And she has never answered it publicly, and perhaps she never will. The court convicted them anyway, because good faith does not bring Ahmed Bouchiki back, because an instrument of a policy is still a person who makes choices, because Norwegian law does not contain an exception for foreign intelligence operations conducted on Norwegian soil, regardless of how legitimate the broader mission might be. Abraham Gamer and Sylvia Raphael received sentences of 5.5 years. The others received shorter sentences. None of them served their full terms. They were quietly released, quietly returned, quietly reabsorbed into the lives they had left behind. Israel said nothing about any of this because Israel had nothing to say about people it had never heard of. Here is what the trial did not do. It did not reach the analysts who confirmed an identification that was wrong. It did not reach the commanders who approved an operation without enough certainty. It did not reach the prime minister who had said yes to a machine without building into that machine any serious mechanism for being wrong. It reached the people who were in Lillehammer, the people at the end of the chain. This is what trials do. They reach the people who can be reached, and the architecture above them, the decisions made in rooms that will never be entered into evidence, the authorization that Israel will never officially acknowledge, that remains untouched. Terrell sat in that courtroom and listened to lawyers argue about her husband in language that turned him into a category, a victim, a piece of evidence, a name in a charge sheet. She listened to people describe the night he died with clinical precision that had nothing to do with standing on that street, with what it had actually been to be next to someone when the world ends. The legal process did not have a category for that. It had categories for wrongful death and unlawful killing and grievous harm to a surviving spouse. It did not have a category for the specific quality of that specific silence after. What she wanted from the trial was not a sentence. What she wanted was for someone to say officially, in a place that made things official, that Ahmed had existed and that what happened to him was wrong. The convictions gave her part of that. Israel never spoke. The institution that had authorized the operation, that had built the machine, that had pointed it at Lillehammer, maintained its silence completely and permanently. No acknowledgement, no apology, no official recognition that Ahmed Bouchiki had ever been a consideration at all. April 28, 2026, 17:23. Maximum. Terrell watched Sylvia Raphael across that courtroom, a woman who had watched her husband in the days before he died and confirmed that he was someone else. And what passed between them in those moments, if anything passed, if their eyes met or did not meet, That too belongs to a register that courtrooms do not record. Who is responsible for Ahmed Bouchiki, the agents who pulled the trigger on information they believed was correct? The analysts who confirmed an identification that was wrong? The commanders who approved the operation without enough certainty? The prime minister who said yes to the machine without building into the machine any real way of being wrong? Or is the answer that responsibility in a case like this does not belong to any single person or decision, that it belongs to the logic itself? The logic that says some targets are legitimate enough that the normal rules do not apply. The logic that says sovereignty is an inconvenience rather than a limit. The logic that says we are certain enough to act, even when certainty is the one thing no intelligence operation can actually guarantee. Because if that logic is responsible, then the problem is not Lillehammer. Lillehammer is just the moment the logic became visible. The problem is every operation before it that worked exactly as planned and therefore never had to answer for itself. Sylvia Raphael married Abraham Gamer after they were released. I do not know what to do with that fact except to put it here. Two people who went through this thing together and chose to remain together after it. What they said to each other about Ahmed Bouchiki, about Israel's statement, about the 5.5 years that were then commuted, about what they had done and what had been done to them, I do not know. That belongs to them. She died in 2005. He died in 2014. They are buried together in Israel. Ahmed Bouchiki is buried in Norway. The café where he worked is gone. The cinema where he and Terrell watched their last film together is gone. Lillehammer has changed the way cities change, slowly and without drama. The ordinary surfaces of life covering over the places where extraordinary things happened. But Terrell is still there, and her son is still there. And the question of what is owed to them by the institution that made them who they are, a widow and a fatherless child, that question has never been answered. Not formally, not officially, not in any way that carries the weight of actual acknowledgement. Just silence. And the name that a Norwegian prosecutor spoke out loud in a courtroom in 1973 into a room full of people who were responsible in ways large and small for the fact that the name now belonged to a dead man. Ahmed Bouchiki. Say it once. It is the least he is owed.